In today's video, I'm going to start sketching a blanket rack. I don't know much about the blanket rack other than how big the blankets are that'll go on the rack. So I'm putting in just some loose points, just putting something down on this big piece of paper, and we'll see where it goes. I've drawn at the top of the page 3 circles that represent the bars the blankets will hang over, and otherwise there's some points along the bottom and some verticals to define the box. And I'll just keep going back and forth, working out overall proportions, overall height, and then I'll start trying to tie them in with something. And to me, blankets and curves kind of go together, so I'm going to use some curves and really start drawing in some curves and thinking about what goes where. You can see I'm not spending a long time in any one place. I go from top to bottom, from left to right, back and forth. Right now I'm not deciding what sort of ornate elements belong here. I'm trying to get a feel for the movement of the design. And now I've decided that the proportion on that left hand side is a little off, so I'm moving the tube in, redrawing the curve, and then moving it back out about half again. You'll see that sooner or later I decide that is correct, and I'll erase that far vertical. Normally I draw with a much harder pencil, something like a 5H, and it makes a very light line. In order to see the work on camera, I'm using an HB, which makes a very dark line. So that little kneadable eraser, what I'm doing is just, it doesn't really erase. Those lines are still there. I'm just lightening them up, making them lighter, and they kind of fall into the background. So if I get too far down this drawing and want to go back, I can still see where my old lines were, and I can just retrace them. At this point I guess I liked what I was up to and decided to make some smaller spirals, kind of vine work, seems like. I'm not really censoring myself. It's just a matter of putting something down on the paper and quickly deciding whether or not that belongs there, whether that's the design direction I want to go. Here I'm checking the length of the blankets to make sure that I'm close, and then back to the design elements. There I'm drawing a baseline, just so the drawing doesn't get lopsided. And more of the little scroll work, reminding me of vines. And the client didn't give me any real direction for this. For instance, I don't have a motif to work with, no leaves, no vines. I just know that the point of this blanket rack is to showcase the blankets, not the rack. So what I'm shooting for is something elegant but understated. And now I'm putting in a hard baseline, something I can refer to and I cannot go past. And this will keep my measurements close to accurate. And that was the end of day 1. We're now on to day 2. You can see I have a new shirt on. And living with it overnight, I woke up and thought it still looked good, so I'm I'm going to pursue this direction and work more on balance, which is why I started at the top. I wanted to fill that area in. And when I added that piece at the top, I decided that the scroll work down at the bottom needed to be a little bit bigger. That would solve the need of structural support, and it also look better. So you see how very lightly I drew that in to think it through. Try to block it out in space so that it works with the lines on the far left hand side of the drawing. And then we'll come back and make it a little more definite. And you can see, in order to size that scroll and shape it out, I keep drawing from one vertical to the bottom of the scroll, and not so much around and around on the scroll. There's a proportion check. And now back to that cross bracing, that X bar. I don't really know what to call it. And it's just a matter of back and forth. And now we'll make a similar scroll in this area. And I can see that there's now two shapes, very G-cleft like, starting to show up, and I like that. And something's not quite right with that cross brace. It was bugging me for a while. So typically I'll just erase it or knock it back so I can barely see it, and then redraw it immediately just to see if it looks the same. And here I'm just going around. I think if you stay in one area too long, you sort of get bound to that area, and one area gets finished and the rest of the drawing isn't even close to done. So back and forth I go. Now there's 3 wool blankets. They're heavy, and the 3 of them together weigh about 35 pounds. That's a lot of weight, and it'll have to sit up on those bars. So at some point I'm going to have to figure out how to bring it down to the ground, how to brace it to the ground, and support all that weight. And that's what I'm trying to think through here. I didn't really like the idea of 3 verticals that went all the way to the ground. So I'm just trying to think it through. And right about there I decide that another vertical is almost mandatory. Some of these curves they're getting distracting. And there goes that line because it's distracting. And now I have 3 verticals and 2 scrolls. And at this point I've decided that's the right direction. You saw the fist clenching. I was trying to figure out how I would pick that up and move it around when it had 35 pounds of blanket on there, and what it would do. And immediately I realized I needed some more cross bracing in there to keep it to make it rigid. So we'll draw in some horizontals. Clean up the circles. Scratch my head and get rid of the horizontals. So here I'm blocking out that space. I'm trying to find the rough center of the negative space down there, and I'm going to put the horizontals just below the center, and that'll stagger them a little bit. And I thought that looked pretty good there. And if ever there was an aha moment, that would be it. And now that I have the bottom bracing done, and I like those two scrolls, I'm going to start filling in this negative space up here. And it just seemed the most logical answer was to invert a couple of scrolls. And that seemed to work. That one scroll farthest from the camera, all the way on the left hand side of the drawing, I thought that could function as a handle and also prevent this thing from just being a little rectangle. We'll make that handle scroll a little bit bigger. Check the proportions. And decide it's good enough. Now I'm laying out a clean sheet of paper directly over top of that drawing. And this paper's it's pretty lightweight. I can almost see through it. And what I'm looking for is sort of a piece of chalk of a good size, and that's a good size. It's a little bigger than 3/8 of an inch long, and that'll give me a consistent line to put down. A consistent line to make a new sketch out of. Clean up some smudges, and here I'm just quickly tracing over my other drawing. I'm not worried about being super accurate. This is just something I will take to the client and give us something we can talk about without having the distraction of all the other lines and all the other attempts visible. I can't quite see these through the paper, so we'll darken them up and get them on. Charcoal doesn't really erase, and neither does pastel, which I think is what this is. I mean, just sort of back that off a little bit. And this is workable fixative. It's just a means of keeping that from smudging and spreading everywhere. And once it's on dry, I can peel this off. Now I could build from this. I can take that out to the shop and just start making things that fit. And we'll roll it up and take it to the client. Thanks for watching.